immensely proud of. And it has already attracted a lot of interest from external visitors who want to think about how to provide such facilities in the future. And I can't think of everybody. I mean, there are too many people for me to thank here, but it has truly been a team effort to get this one over the line. So I hope you will join me in thinking, at least, of everybody who you know who has been involved in it over many years. And I do know there have been some glitches on the road, but that isn't a moment to reflect on those. This is a moment this morning to reflect on the undoubted triumph of getting that over the line. And actually, despite all the travails that assail the NHS and all the travails that sometimes assail the ambulance sector, it is something to be hugely proud of. Let's just reflect on that before we go too much further into the meeting. And I hope I've not just tempted fate there by saying how well it's going already this morning, but it is going well. My report in the pages that you've got in front of you stands. I'll just draw out a few things in addition to that. So the first is yesterday on behalf of CCAM, I attended the National Urgent and Emergency Care Stocktake hosted by the Prime Minister. That was really to look at winter preparedness and how the NHS is gearing up to meet the twin challenges of maintaining a safe emergency service, but also continuing to make inroads into the waiting lists across the NHS. I found the discussion to be positive, focused and helpful. The politicians were keen to hear from us about what we were able to suggest and wanted to hear from us about our ideas about how we could do more and go further. And I had the opportunity to contribute our issues from the ambulance sector point of view into that discussion. I think winter undoubtedly will be a challenge, and just to signal, a major item in our public board next month will be consideration of our winter plan and where we are in respect of that. In the board meeting that we had last month, I just want to draw out a couple of things, and obviously very happy to take questions this morning. I presented my priorities to the board and sought their endorsement for those. Those are listed in the papers that you have in front of you. I've spent, at the time of writing, I was just over 100 days in post, and so I thought it important that the board heard what I had seen and heard from staff and my own thoughts about where the organisation should be going. Pleased to say the board supported those, and those 7 priorities will inform my work, my actions at a personal level over the next 2 to 3 years. It's kind of my North Star for action. We're going to hear about some of them today. Probably one of the most important things that we will do as a board, and you will be involved in it as a council, is developing our strategy for the future. And really that work is just in the space of starting to kick off now in earnest. We had a very good strategy. In fact, that strategy is in part the thing that delivered us some of the estate facilities that I've just talked about. But it's right after COVID and right with the challenges that are facing the NHS and the ambulance sector and CCAM that we now think again about what does the future look like. We've engaged early and significantly with our commissioners who are keen to have this debate with us. But really there's a profound existential question for the organisation about what sort of ambulance service is it going to be in the future. There's no doubt that we picked up a lot of work during COVID, and some of that work has stuck around, some of it hasn't, but quite a lot of it has. And we need to have that debate about, is that going to be how we are going to be going forward, or are we going to do something different? And you will have your opportunity to start your thoughts into that debate this morning. To say, first and foremost, that will not be the only time we talk about strategy. This is going to be, for me, a dominant thread of our conversation over the next 6 months. My aim is that as we turn to the new year, we will have an opportunity to come back to you with a final strategy, but that will then inform all of the very important discussions about how our ambulance service is funded, what it's funded for, what the expectations are on us to deliver. And I think it's up to us to set the leadership tone in that debate. And clearly, you as a council have a really important role to play in that. So I really welcome that conversation this morning. There are no wrong ideas, there are no stupid ideas. The important thing today is that we get what I've termed the wicked questions out into the open. So what are the real thorny issues that we need to grapple with, that when we finish the strategy we can say we have dealt with that and we know where we stand. I'm not going to prejudge the conversation to come, but that's where I really hope we get to this morning. In other work I have alluded to, I will simply take questions. So on the strategy, I will, in the interest of time and wanting to get to that, I'm very happy to take questions from the council.
Thank you, Simon. Are there any questions of clarity of what Simon has said and introduced in his report? Colleagues, my non-executive colleagues can deal with any matters of assurance. So first of all, any questions of clarity about what the Chief Executive has just said to the council? Colleagues. Are you content with what the Chief Executive report? That's good to hear. Well, silence, I'm taking as approval, unless there's any other. Kirsty.
Hopefully that's worked, yeah. I would just like to say thank you to the Trust, really, for the Medway move. Having been a member of staff that worked at Coxheath all those many moons ago, and that's nearly 20 years ago, I would just like to say it's brilliant to see it, because actually the staff seem happy going in there. I know we're not taking all our staff with us on that journey, but I think it's the start of a new journey, I think, for a lot of staff, and actually it's really nice to see. So I'd just like to say thank you to the Trust, really.
Thanks, Kirsty. I mean, I had the opportunity to see it in its slightly fully opened phase, and I walked around some of the call handling facilities that we've got there now, and I think what really struck me was how delighted people were with their working environment and the place that, how great that was. I mean, not only was there a beautiful sweeping view over the estuary, but people said this is a really fantastic place to work, and people were, I think, really positively looking forward to what they could do with the facility that they now had. And I strongly believe that those buildings make a real difference to attracting staff, retaining staff, making people feel good about the environment that they're working in, I think makes a real difference. And I know you and others have been profoundly involved in helping shape it over many more years than I have. So I hope you take a moment to reflect on it positively too.
I think if I may just to reflect on Kirsty's comments, what I think that from a non-executive point of view, what we found particularly pleasing was the way in which our leadership led the change from both Ashford 111 and Coxheath. Both those buildings were not the best, for sure, and were not the best at working environments, and it was really good to see our staff march out of there with a plan. Not as you said, Kirsty, not everyone was able to make the move to Medway, but nevertheless they were handled, I think, with dignity and appropriately, and people marched out of those buildings and celebrated what they had achieved in less than satisfactory circumstances. So there's a lot of positives in the whole Medway story. I'm sure there'll still be some glitches along the way, but I think the management are focused on that. Certainly from a non-executive point of view, we're clearly assured by the progress they've made in that area. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Simon, for giving assurance over our involvement in the strategy, so that we're not given the finished product at the end without any opportunity to input to it up front. I've got a couple of questions around your priorities, if I may. But you have one which is around empowerment and senior leadership development. Could you just say something a little more on how you see that? Because something that I've observed both in my professional life and another ambulance service and here is that ambulance services are not good at doing delegation, and we're using the concept of tolerances and empowerment downwards. So I'd be interested to see what you had to say about that, because I know you've got an action plan sitting underneath these. And the second thing was around obstacles to taking people on board. There is the issue about paramedics having to fund their own C1 licences that bubbled up as a consequence of that. I know we provide help to auxiliaries, but we don't to paramedics. Well, that's a potential obstacle if you're somebody of modest means. And the second one is, again, I mean, just on an anecdotal basis, well, I know of somebody who graduated from university, fully qualified paramedic, but apparently there's something called a grip test where you have to squeeze a certain pressure, and this person failed by 0.1% or something and had to then retake and all the rest of it, and so there was built-in time delay there. So I think there's a lot of what you might call small but nevertheless important obstacles to actually onboarding quickly.
So could you answer obviously clearly what you're aware of, but also can I also bring in Subo as well from the point of view of assurance from the non-executives around the whole issue about leadership development, which I'm sure you can speak about. But Simon.
Thanks, Martin. Well, hopefully the workshop session that we've got this morning, and the clue is in the word I've just said, workshop, will give you the opportunity to feel that you are involved in shaping the strategy right at the outset. And as we go forward, this will be a topic I hope to bring back on more than one occasion to Council of Governors, so that you are actively involved in shaping it, because obviously you reaching out as members of the communities in which you live also have a role to play to help us hear those voices as we go through the process. But genuinely my commitment is we are all in this together. The absolute commitment I've made is that this is a clinically led process. Because it is the clinicians of all stripes and colours in the organisation who need to speak loudest and most clearly, which is why I'm really glad that Rachel, our medical director, who's sitting in the audience today, will co-lead the work in terms of developing the strategy. The other really important thing to say in terms of partners in the strategy, which I really do want to emphasise, is it's very easy sometimes for NHS organisations to look internally and think it's our strategy, we're going to build it. But in actual fact, of course, never more so than today, we live in an integrated system. We've got integrated systems by name as well as by intent now. And so it's going to be really key that we involve our commissioning partners from right across the region in making sure that we get the right answer for CCAM. What I'm really pleased to say is they are delighted to be involved and really want to be. On empowerment, your second point, we actually had a board development day last week, and that's the second in a series of conversations. And one of the ways in which I am trying to create my word for it is meaningful autonomy. Ever since I've come to the organisation, I've heard from our OUMs that they want to have more control, more say over their day-to-day lives. And we started that process back in July, and what I did then was on behalf of the board give each OUM £3,000 to spend on anything that they wanted to do in relation to looking after their staff. And the part of the board development conversation was a very simple question. So what have you done with it? Because that actually, for me, is signalling that we want to make a change in terms of the way we treat people. We trust you to spend money. And why is that important? It's important because one of the cultural things that people talk about in CCAM is everything is tied up in a lot of bureaucracy. And sometimes bureaucracy is necessary, and sometimes it stifles people from doing things that they can and should do. An example we had from the last board development session, which is just stuck in my head, was somebody saying it takes 2 weeks to get a roll of sellotape into a frontline office. And, you know, we need to get better at giving people more flexibility around that. And because these changes take time, as a board we've committed to meeting with the OUMs every board development day and developing that conversation around autonomy. So let me give you another example of where we're going to go next. One of the OUMs, Lawrence from Medway, said he wanted the freedom to be able to say that if in his staffing complement, because we give our OUMs significant responsibility in terms of the number of staff that they manage, he wanted to swap out a paramedic for a scheduler because that's what he needed to do in order to deliver the service that he was responsible for. I think we have to go there. I think we have to trust our frontline leaders to be able to make the right decisions locally, because the needs of the people of Medway are not the same as the needs of the people of Banstead, and the teams are different and the locations are different. So that's the conversation where we're going to go next. And in our next board development session, which will be in October, we will have and take that conversation, November, we will take that conversation further. But be under no illusion, Martin, that's going to take some time. You're right to point out that it's an ambulance service cultural artefact to have quite a centralist culture, quite a command and control culture. My belief is that we have to work with people to give them as much autonomy as they possibly can to do the job that we need them to be able to do. On your two specific points, you'll have to allow me the latitude to go away and check so I wasn't aware of the C1 licences issue, but I will go and check that. And on the drip test issue, again, if you could bear with me, I will pick that up outside of here. But I hope that broadly gives you And my final point I'd make is, of course, if we empower OUM successfully, those sorts of issues should be being solved locally, shouldn't they? And would be my view. That's where I would want us to try and get to.
Super. I don't think you wanted to add as chairman of the People Committee regarding assurance about the direction of travel that Simon is setting.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and just a small addition, really. I think we've seen at People Committee the formal training that we are pursuing, regardless of what surge level we are in, and that we are committed to training, and that includes management and leadership training across all grades and all levels. And it's not just about clinical leadership, it's also about leadership with our corporate departments, because of course meaningful autonomy means that there is leadership to support that kind of local nuanced decision making. So this is about leadership development for everyone, and we're looking particularly at the next People Committee about the evaluation of that training. How effective has it been? And of course you want to look at some of those metrics, so that they may or may not be such a direct correlation, but again, handling grievances and disciplinaries locally before they escalate to that kind of level is going to be one way of measuring how effective that training has been. So the People Committee has been monitoring this for some time, and we will continue to do so.
Kirsty?
So it's probably Simon and Subo, sorry. So in your report you've put about the extra funding that the trustees, we've actually been given the further funding that we're potentially bidding for. Can I just ask for some assurance that the back office function, i.e. the audit, anything else to bring all these extra staff on? So I see here we've got extra 999 call handling, extra clinical staff within our contact centres. We need to make sure that they are safe. And I would like some assurance that we're including the audit aspect of that, because at the moment, the back office function hasn't been included in any of the bids going forward, and we do need to address that, please.
Yeah, we do. Part of the work that I have also talked about in my priorities is looking at the structure, and that work I'm planning to kick off later on this month at the end of September with the executive team. We've invested a lot, and rightly, in our frontline services to make sure that patients receive a great service. But we've invested. We also need to consider what we need to invest in our support functions in order to make sure that staff actually get the support they need once they're in post. And so that's very much in my focus as we turn to that structural review. And I'll be talking about that over the months ahead. But to name some areas, I've already had an initial conversation with Saba, who's I did note, I think it's your first Council of Governors meeting, Saba, so Saba's our new CFO, and I should take the opportunity to formally welcome her. I did in my report, but I do so verbally here. I've already had an initial conversation about what we need to do to strengthen the finance and procurement function, and there are a number of other areas where we will need to do like work over the months ahead. Again, one I name in the report that I know you're particularly close to is medicines, and the work that we need to do to make sure we have appropriate facilities to support the safe packaging and delivery of medicines to our frontline staff. but there are a number of others. Rather than list them all here, what I hope you can hear in my answer is that it is in my line of sight, and as part of that structure work, I will be looking at that with the executive team starting later on this month.
And I'll ask the committee, my colleague NEDs who chair the appropriate committees also work with Simon to ensure there's an appropriate balance in terms of governance of this, because in order to get our clinical staff into the best place, we need the best possible corporate departments as well. So the two go together. So it's important we strike that balance. Michael?
Yeah. I think, Kirsty, you make a really strong point. My observation of the NHS more widely is that compared with other comparable sectors, the transparency of the level of investment in corporate back office is not as good as it could be. And certainly, just to give you assurance from an audit committee perspective, really emphasising this point, what I'm used to organisations that are able to articulate very clearly through a series of indicators what level of investment you've got in support services, how efficient and effective that support service is the level of investment appropriate for the business model, in this case the delivery of patient care. I do think we've got some way to go, but I very much support the direction that Simon is taking it, but we do need better information.
But I think the strategy discussion is key, because that sets the direction of travel, and that we can make sure our form follows function. We have the appropriate corporate departments to support the delivery of clinical care. Make sure we've got the right people in the right place at the right time. Any other questions? Martin? Then Nick?
Sorry, yes. I'm just on a completely different subject. I'm glad to see that the issues around the medical distribution centre and emergency preparedness are being reviewed. I suppose the question comes up, given mention of risk around these, how assured we are that if, firstly, in terms of the medicines things, that we can keep the show on the road, and secondly, if there's a major event of a very bad nature, whether we're really prepared for it. I only mention that because that's come up before. I think it was in the audit committee about 2 or 3 months ago. And my second thing is, as mention of body-worn cameras, how are we assured about patient privacy in the context of wearing body-worn cameras?
On your point about, and my report I think makes clear that we are doing this work, I have commissioned an external review of our major incident capability and our ability to respond. That review I'm expecting will report through the October board cycle and be public in November. So that work is underway. In terms of the Medicines Distribution Centre, we actually have Rachel in the audience. Where I think we are at the moment is that the fundamental issues that afflict us is that we are in a building that is not fit for purpose. We need to take immediate remedial action to address some of the challenges, and probably the first action that we need to take is putting in a lift so that the facilities, the medicines as they're moved around the building, can be moved safely and appropriately without risk to staff. We can keep the show on the road, but if you've been to that facility, you'll know that it's very suboptimal in terms of staff working conditions, and that for me is probably one of the signal risks that we're carrying. You're also fortunate to have a staff governor who is particularly expert in that field and who lobbied me early on and very successfully to get my attention onto this matter. So the broader piece, though, is we need to continue to look at Paddock Wood as a facility. I mean, of our make-ready centres, it is clearly not the best. It was one of the early ones. There are all sorts of problems with the layout to do it, in the core function of it, let alone how medicines fits into that. And we need to think about, do we actually now go for a separate facility in terms of, as other ambulance services have done? SCAS are doing that at the moment, LAS have done it. And if we go for that separate facility, how do we future-proof it? LAS have recently reported to me that despite the fact that they only just built that facility 2 years ago, they've already outgrown it. And I think we would face a similar problem. Or, alternatively, do we look for a a combined solution for Paddock Wood and the medicines management facility, and that is the work that the estates team working with Rachel's team are now considering. That does not mean we will not take action on Paddock Wood, because that's actually quite a complicated piece of work, to start to stabilise the facilities that we've got, and the first step around those is the lift. And as I said, Martin, on the major incident review, you will expect to see that come through the board committees in October and into November.
But to answer your question directly from a non-executive point of view, we are partially assured that both items need management's attention, but we are assured they're getting the management's attention, and the reports to the board in due course.
Nick had a question.
Sorry, Nick.
Sorry, it's fine. I think you answered most of the questions I was going to ask. My primary concern is about the medicines distribution centre. I think, the first person who ever worked at Paddock Wood, wasn't I? And it's been appalling from the start. It's like a jigsaw piece that just keeps adding pieces on. It was never a suitable site, but it was taken and it's been used, but it's completely outgrown its purpose. In regard to the medicines distribution centre especially, which is a key part of our operational work. If we don't have medicines, we can't work. It got to that point in February, March, where there was a BCI declared because there weren't enough medicines. I was in there packing. We had people, anyone was in there packing medicines because it's just not fit for purpose. I mean, I believe currently there's a vermin infestation which has been investigated, and that's in the storage part. Well, that's not suitable. It's not acceptable. And I think it's not. I understand there is a new lift going in. That's one of the proposed changes, but that's only one part of what needs doing. The building is not fit for purpose. It needs a separate building. It needs one that is future-proofed. Like you said, you have to build in because we know our demand's going to get bigger and bigger. And I just want assurances that this has been treated. It has to be a number one priority. It has to be seen as that.
I think, Nick, I can say that it got to my executive management board. I reported it at the board and indicated that it is one of my 3 key operational priorities at the moment. I can't tell you that I can give you today an answer about where we're going to be, because some of the decisions that would require, in other words, is it going to be a bespoke facility or is it going to be part of a new Paddock Wood, rightly should deserve proper consideration because they involve significant sums of money. We are on with taking the remedial action to try and make the best of what we've got at the moment. But if you want my absolute assurance, I fully understand the point that you're making. I've been to the facility, I've seen for myself. A jigsaw puzzle is probably a very polite way of putting what we've got in there at the moment. But we have to start from there and then take a series of logical steps to try and get us into a better place. We are on with that, and I will continue to keep the board and the council informed of what we're doing.
Just to make the point again, the board are absolutely onto this, and I think you'll reflect in the minutes of various subcommittees that the board, my non-executive colleagues, are pursuing this vigorously, both items. But also, I think the other issue that we're pursuing is, and the executive have got this in hand, is when we do a major capital development. And in fairness, Paddock Wood was the first of concept. Is to make sure we do a more rigorous evaluation when we invest significant sums of money, particularly in infrastructure, be it IT, be it buildings. And so what we're encouraging the executive to bring forward is a more rigorous evaluation, benefits realisation, so we can learn from each one. And that's something that I know is very much involved in the executive work plan, particularly with the new Medway development, for example. That will be subject to a detailed evaluation, both from a capital investment point of view, but also in terms of how the building works. Because we've got a lot to share with the rest of the ambulance sector.
No, definitely. And I mean, Medway is good. It's a great facility. I've been up there. I'll probably be working up there at some point. Just going back to that, it's a great, beautiful, shining box, but if the culture inside is rotten, it's still rotten. So also there needs to be some assurance that the reviews that have been done on the culture, especially the old Coxheath EOC, as we'll now call it, that's been investigated, and it's not just going to flip into a great new facility, but the behaviour still continue, and that's what you don't want. So you need some assurance there that that's going to be good. Just on one quick point about your your release of autonomy to the OUMs, I think that's an absolutely brilliant idea. And like you said, I think you can't treat every area the same, because Worthing is very different to Medway, is different to Hastings, and I think they have their own nuances, shall we say. And I think the operating managers, the OUMs, should have that ability to tailor the service within guidelines, obviously, but not be clamped by some edict that comes from above that you all have to behave in the same way. And I think you'll see an improvement in staff relations as well, if they feel that they're being dealt with really well by their own managers and not from for want of a better term, a faceless body somewhere making decisions that really impact on them, but they don't understand the decisions that are being made by those people. So I think that's an absolute brilliant move forward, and I think the OUMs will really be on board with that.
Thanks. That's really nice feedback, and I appreciate it. I mean, I think as testament to the fact the OUMs were in the room, as I said last Thursday, they were absolutely engaged and wanting to be part of the conversation and had some really great ideas about how things can and should develop. And I also completely agree with your other point. It has to be within a framework. Autonomy is an adult-to-adult conversation, isn't it? We give you the authority to act within these boundaries and the responsibility to act within these boundaries. So you have a pay budget and a non-pay budget and a staffing team. You get to, within a framework, you get to decide what's right for your area. And that's the way we should be behaving. In return, what we expect from you is you deliver these things. And that's part of the next stage of the conversation, which I challenged the OUMs as we left the room last Thursday to go away and have a think about how they wanted to take that conversation forward. And it was Lawrence, I said, who came up with the idea from Medway about can I have the flexibility within my budget to alter how I use staff. And I think we have to trust him that he's doing that. And I've also got great confidence that he, to your last point, is creating the type of culture in Medway that I'm sure we'd all want to be a part of.
But your general point about culture is being pursued by the People Committee and by the board generally, because we know we've still got work to do in all areas of the trust, but particularly in our call centres. That again is subject to an improvement plan, and we are watching that carefully. So thanks for raising that point. Final comment, Harvey, and I'll move us on.
Yeah, I suppose it's connected with some of the numbers. We're currently running, according to the latest stats, which I realise are a month or two ago, training force, statutory and mandatory, is 10% below target, and the target's only 85%. Appraisals 58% against the target of 85%, and both are reported that they're expected to not reach the target, to fail. My question really, I suppose, is around this cultural thing. We've targeted training, which is statutory and mandatory. What about all the other development and training that we do need? There doesn't seem to be a target on that. Is there time for it to happen? Is it happening? Because it's great to hear the OUMs are on board and want, but there's that marzipan layer below them before we reach the people on the trucks. How do we get to them? How do we change them? How do we get them to appreciate the importance of appraisals? Because that's talk about development, how people can contribute more. It's a two-way conversation. That's not happening. So I have a concern.
I want to give a general response. I want to get into too much detail, but perhaps I'm bringing Subo. I know from the Workforce Committee, for People Committee, this has been receiving your attention.
So that's precisely why I want to encourage this relationship with the OUMs that I'm talking about. Because I can tell people to do an appraisal. And ultimately, if I really go for it, I can force a certain target over the line. Because you can do that, can't you? Exactly. And you understand that very well, I know, Harvey, because what we really want is for our OUMs to believe it's really important to have this conversation and to make sure all their people are having this conversation. And I will know that we've succeeded when it's less of me making a diktat, you must do this, and more them coming to me and saying, as a result of all the appraisal conversations I've had, here is what I want you to know. Here is what our people are telling me. Do we get all the training right? And Suba, I know, is absolutely on and focused with this in the People Committee. Do we give people all the space that they need to do the personal development that they need to? No, not always, and we need to do better. And again, I would make the argument that's why we need to encourage that greater level of autonomy, because it's those conversations about what we can put on the road, how we can safely staff it, what we can keep back for people to go on training, that have to take place at a local level. Am I also concerned about the quality of the conversation? So again, I think you rightly alluded to the fact these need to be two-way conversations. The stats that we report tell us only that we've had the conversation. They don't tell us what that conversation was like. We know from the staff survey that we could do better, but it's an inference rather than a direct relationship. And one of the things I'm really concerned that we do is we develop the quality of those conversations. And so rest assured, I know that this is absolutely in Subo's focus on the People Committee, but it's also my focus in terms of one of the reasons why I'm pursuing this idea of it shouldn't just be the top-down conversation. We have to get to a place where our managers say, I want to do this because I believe in it.
Thank you. Subo, a brief assurance comment, please, and then we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Harvey. Really good question. I think what I would say from People Committee perspective is that, well, from my personal perspective as well, when I arrived in this organisation, I think my view was that there was real infantilisation of training in this organisation. If you look at all of the other healthcare professions, they have a very mature, grown-up conversation about what is their CPD, what is their training, how are they going to develop their careers. Here we have key skills and we mandate, and that's necessary up to a point, all of their training and all of their statutory and mandatory training. And some of that is absolutely right. But we need to get to a place where we can have a mature conversation with grown-ups who are clinical professionals, who are doing very responsible jobs out there, about how do we see their careers developing, where do they see themselves going, hopefully with CCAM. So this is a part of a retention conversation as well. How do we keep them with us? And therefore, how would they like to tailor their training to be able to meet their career aspirations? That's a grown-up conversation. That's why all the leadership and management training that we're doing at all the levels is going to be key to underpin that. And you can only build those kinds of meaningful one-to-one conversations on solid foundations of having coached, mentored and trained your people appropriately. So if I can give you some assurance, we're keeping our eye on that. It starts with looking at the granular detail to making sure you get the numbers, and then you have to start looking at more sophisticated areas around what is the impact of those conversations.
Yeah, briefly, please.
It is a very quick point. Harvey, you're quite right to raise this, and I just want to give you some additional assurance. David and I have talked about this quite extensively, and I think there's a history in CCAM of dealing with symptoms, not root cause, and that's very much why we support what Simon is seeking to do. This is about getting the basics right, getting people a bit more mature. And I would say to you, what we talked about is we need to give Simon a bit of time to do this, because you're not going to achieve this. I think we'll be meeting in November, and you could probably ask the same question. If we meet a year from now and you're still asking the same question, I think we have a problem. So I do think there needs to be a bit of time and recognition that this will take a while to turn around.
There's a clear lag, obviously, in the stats and the numbers, and one recognises that. It's looking at the stats, they're not improving. So there hasn't been that sort of hockey stick or whatever change which one hopes to see, because it's seeping into the organisation. Yes, it's going to take time, and I applaud Simon for attempting it, but it is a really, really difficult thing to do, because you've got to change the mindset of a huge number of people, about 4,500.
Exactly right, and that's why Michael's point is right. This is going to take time. we're talking a 2 to 3 year programme of sustained effort. But what you do have is my commitment to that continued effort until this job is done.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And again, for the record, the board are completely aligned on this approach, and we're right behind Simon in what he's trying to do here. Right, let's move on to the next important item, development of our new trust strategy. And I think Matt is in the audience, going to join us at the table. We have a spot mark guest for you there, Matt, but not really a guest, are you? Part of the team.
Sorry, Matt, you've got a clicker there to control these slides. Morning. I'm here on behalf of David this morning. So for those that I haven't met, Matt Webb, Associate Director of Strategy and Partnerships. David sends his apologies that he can't be with you this morning. Okay, so if I try and skip us to the next one. Okay, the screen's quite small, so what I will do is just talk through some of the key points, and some of the bits are slightly more difficult to read. So on the screen in front of you, we've got the aim and the approach of our strategic programme. When I last visited Councillor Governor colleagues, I gave an overview alongside David. I know he's returned since, around what we were aiming to achieve, and at that time we were in the framing stage. What you've got on the screen now, hopefully, is more clarity around exactly what we're looking to achieve through the strategy programme. So our aim is to create an ambitious and innovative long-term strategy that champions sustainable, high-quality, equitable care for our patients, enhances the experience of our people, supports our partners and protects our environment. And not to read through all these points in turn, but as you'll see, the approach at the bottom there is absolutely centred around our patients. It's around co-design. It's an internally driven strategy. And as has already been mentioned, a strategy that's clinically led. What you will see in the slides is we will be working with a strategic partner. I think just to draw that out now, the strategy absolutely will be internally driven. So we recognise that we have the clinical expertise within the organisation. Excuse me. We don't need clinicians to advise us what's best. We also understand that we need to work better with our patients and have real good relationships with our partners. However, we do recognise there are some gaps within the organisation, and at the moment that's around change management, and that's around ensuring that we can make the strategy reality and sustainable moving forward. So it's about having the right skill sets and then setting us up for sustainability and to future-proof the organisation moving forward. So there's a number of programme stages on the screen there. We have based our strategy around the well-established monitor framework. That was a recommendation from our NHS England colleagues, but have looked to simplify that, working with our partners. So there's 3 core stages. The weeks are at the bottom there. So the first part is around framing the strategy programme. So why are we undertaking this? And I'll go through these in a little bit more detail in a second. We then look to diagnose the current state and then forecast what do we think the future should look like and anticipate actually what it's likely to look like. The second phase we move into is then around generating strategic options. So once we have a really good understanding of our current state and we understand perhaps what the future of health and care looks like, what are perhaps the 5 strategic options with an associated operating model for how we can best deliver that equitable care for our patients, support our people and work with our partners. And we'll be working with the Council of Governors, and you'll see some clear timeframes and timelines in a second, board colleagues and our people across the organisations, and evaluate what those strategic options look like. And as I mentioned, that the last part then is around implementation and transform. So again, how do we ensure the organisation is set up not only to design a strategy, but then over the next 2 up to 5 years, ensure that we make that strategy a reality and implement that in a succinct and effective manner. So as I mentioned, the first stage was then framing. So that was understanding why do we need to embark on this journey. And what you've got on the screen here are the wicked questions that have come out of a number of workshops. And I know colleagues within this forum have absolutely been part of those discussions. And again, not to go through these in turn, but some of the key points that I've just highlighted are around our people, our partners, our patients and associate colleagues recognising that we don't necessarily understand what the purpose is, not only of CCAM, but also I think that the ambulance sector is on a journey at the moment to understand its purpose within the wider health and care landscape. With that, what does our service model need to look like? And then there's a number, they're all key points, but there's a number of key points I want to draw out. The first one around how do we engage, retain and develop our workforce. Recently, in the last couple of weeks, we've had the NHS long-term plan, which absolutely sets out the NHS ambition, particularly around how do we develop, how do we support and how do we retain. We've got technology, data and innovation on there. So we're going to have some fairly radical discussions as part of the strategy piece. I'm sure colleagues are aware that there's an awful lot of talk in the world at the moment around artificial intelligence, and we need to be on the front foot more. So actually, how do we leverage that technology? The space that the NHS is absolutely looking at the moment is particularly around patient safety. So for us, actually, could that assist with supporting patients upstream? Actually, how do we ensure patients are safe right the way throughout their journey across the UEC system? And the last one I'll draw out on this slide is around partnerships, resource and political alignment. So what we now have is also our joint forward plans for each of our integrated care systems. So actually we now have a real good awareness of the key priorities that each integrated care system is looking to achieve and deliver on, again in the next 2 to 5 years, which aligns nicely with our strategy timeframe. So we'll be looking at how do we align ourselves with the integrated care systems, but also how can they support us. Okay, so the next slide then just goes into a bit more detail then around the next stage, which is where we are at the moment. So we've now moved into the diagnosis stage. We're very much now looking at understanding the lived experience of our people and our clinicians that are delivering care, recognising the clinical focus of this strategy. It's centred very much around data and evidence. We have a fantastic capability with regards to data analytics, and Alex's team, and then to understand the needs of our patients and our partners and how we prioritise those. So what are we looking to get out of the diagnosis phase? Again, it is absolutely around the current state at the moment. So before we start to solutionise and move forward, actually having a really good understanding of actually our impact on the UEC sector as it currently stands, the external influences and what are the key drivers of change. So what we're looking to get from this phase, the diagnosis stage, is a good understanding of our population health needs across our 4 integrated care systems, using tools such as SWOT and PESTLE analysis to understand those external and internal influences, and then using that data to understand those strategic enablers of which some have been mentioned around, are we set up in the right way with regards to estates and some of those support functions. So again, what we've used throughout the diagnose phase is a series of workshops with our partners, with our people, and also bringing in our patients now into these discussions with service user representation. And we've centred those discussions around 3 key questions. So do we have a good understanding of who are our patients? Do we truly understand the reasons they're calling us? And how are we responding today? And this actually comes back to Michael's point, which is having a really good understanding of the root cause as opposed to responding and reacting to the symptoms. So not going to stay on this slide for too long, but this is just an example in this diagnosis phase of actually the activity we've undertaken in quite a short period of time. So we kicked this off in August. We had a descriptive data hackathon led by Alex within the audience. And really started to dive into actually what data do we have access to, how do we really understand the needs of our populations. Then there were a number of workshops that followed, and what we did within these workshops is brought together our operational leaders and colleagues that represented our operational and service delivery arms, together with our clinical leaders, and have had some really good, constructive but challenging conversations from a curious lens. Which have then brought us to the board development workshop we had last week, which has then produced a clinical case for change, and I'll go through it in a second. We'll now be moving into a formal 4-week diagnostic phase, and that will be working with our strategic partner. There'll be a number of key points we'll be looking at, so it's to gain further insights from our staff. I think some of the points that have been raised here, so Martin's point is key. We need to start speaking to all of our people, including colleagues within this room. I've mentioned patients and commissioners, starting to look at things such as financial performance, and then again, those joint forward plans and integrated care strategies. So what are the local priorities and needs of our integrated care systems for their respective populations? So this slide's going to be a little bit difficult to read, so I'll just talk through this one. So, and this is just at a high level, really, just to offer a bit of an insight as to what we've been looking at. So who are our patients? So some of the key things we've identified is our strengths as CCAM, as a provider of 909 and 111 services, is we are a data-rich organisation, and we can absolutely support the systems with access to that data. We have a really good understanding of complex health conditions, and you'll see some of that data for colleagues that are remaining with us later today or within the AMM discussions later. And one of the strengths is we have a known static population that we can cater for and respond to. If we then look at the weaknesses, we also have a significant transient population, which makes the job rather challenging, particularly within the South East. We have a number of transportation hubs that members of the public pass through. Whilst we have data-rich insights, I think it'd be fair to say we have a bit of a data overload at the same time at the moment, and we really need to prioritise that data to use it intelligently. And then it's understanding how do we prioritise our patients, recognising we also fill an awful lot of service gaps at the moment. So the opportunities for us with regards to our patients are we can absolutely look at how we tailor our services to the demographics of our patients and the population health needs. We can use clinical coding to guide our interventions. And at the bottom left there around opportunities, we've determined there's probably 4 segmentations of patient need. There's the social matters, there's urgent care requirements, emergent requirements and critical care requirements. And interestingly, just the graph or the chart on the right-hand side there around our top 15 patient conditions, we currently have a model employed that is focused around transportation and it's focused around injury. And if we look at our uppermost 4 conditions there, they are medical conditions, they're also complex health conditions. So it starts to demonstrate with the data we're looking at that perhaps we're not set up in the right way to serve the evolving needs of patients that we're responding to today. And just on that, some interesting facts for you, and apologies, Rachel and I will be repeating some of these later on this afternoon, so you'll hear these twice. So our demand, 54% of our demand is from the over 65 population, but actually that population only accounts for 20% of our geographical footprint. As I mentioned there, our uppermost call, 20% of incidents come from cardiac issues, but demonstrating the complexity of the patients we're responding to, a further 20% are social matters, frailty, mental health. And a really interesting stat there is 1 in 10 hours on scene that when we respond, are falls responses. So that's our fifth most common call. And then there's the piece around actually how do we work with the system to look at those individuals that are frequently making contact with us and how do we best support them. So last year we responded to circa 700,000 incidents, and you can see a significant proportion. 400,000 were unique patients. So there's a fairly considerable number of calls that were duplicate calls and same patients, with 3% of patients generating 20% of our demand. So the next bit then we've looked at is then, and I've grouped these together, why do patients call us? How do we respond today? So again, our strengths are we're seen as a reliable, well-regarded organisation service. We're consistently and easily accessible. The door is always open and we offer a prompt response. We also have a highly skilled workforce that we absolutely need to leverage through this strategy and understand how we can work with our system colleagues more. The weaknesses with those, though, are we do not self-declare our capacity. So you can consider any other organisation, other services within the health and care sector, and they will reach a certain capacity and then the doors will temporarily close. So we are challenged from a resilience perspective. Other challenges we have are misalignment of pathways. We're also very good within the ambulance sector at solutionising. We are solution oriented, but we need to understand what are the commissioning expectations and needs of our patients, and then we can clearly then have a model that isn't just a one-size-fits-all approach, but actually meets the needs of those patients. With regards to how we respond today, opportunities, we absolutely recognise the need to support the public health agenda. We need to take a much more preventative, proactive approach. I've discussed embracing the technology and the innovations there. And clearly, I think already what's come out of the discussions this morning is around the need to truly integrate with our partners and to ensure seamless joined-up care. This graph is going to be rather impossible for you to see from where you're sitting. So please feel free, I think will be the message, to come to the strategy and partnership stand later and we'll talk you through this. But at a high level, on the right-hand side, what you've got is the hear and treat activity that comes through the organisation. You followed then by a slightly more or slightly increased volume around see and treat, and then we've got our see and convey. So that's us responding and conveying patients to emergency departments or to an appropriate facility. Now, some of the things that have come out here is we respond physically to an awful number of patients that actually we refer from scene and don't take them anywhere else, and we don't do much. We don't offer further interventions for those patient groups. So arguably, this is the bit around upstream. We need to be doing more much earlier on in the call to appropriately redirect and support our patients in accessing the most appropriate care pathway. I think the other point then I'll just draw out here, and again, I can go in more detail with Alex and team later on, but there are a number of emergency categories of calls on here, and what you'll see when we go through this later is they result in hear and treat or see and treat. So actually, we need to understand why that's happening in the first case, why those chains are broken. Clearly, processes and mechanisms are failing elsewhere in the system, and we need to be having those discussions with our partners, commissioning colleagues to understand how we can best support the needs of our patients across the region. So as I mentioned, so the discussions and the workshops then that have taken place during recent weeks and months have presented that clinical case for change. So we now have a very good understanding of what the problem is. The problem is that our patient needs are more diverse than ever, and we have evolving and growing complexity across the health and care landscape. The current model, it was based around a one-size-fits-all approach that was extremely reactive and time-driven, and clearly that results in inappropriate resource allocation. We've discussed this morning the stress on our workforce and patient risk that can introduce. So the opportunity then that I've highlighted within those slides, hopefully, is around we need to look at how we differentiate our responses across that social, urgent, emergency and critical care groups. How do we leverage that technology and best optimise the clinical expertise of our leaders across the organisation? We need to shift strategically, understand how we can best support the addressing health inequalities within the system, how we can support patients upstream, and manage demand not only as a provider, but how we support the sector through a whole systems approach, meeting both patient needs and the partner expectations around greater integration, a system-centric approach. So our case for change is fairly straightforward. We need the data insights have demonstrated we need that differentiated response. We need to be intelligently data-driven. We need to support our diverse workforce. Can't express enough how we need to be clinically led as an organisation, and encouragingly, discussions are very much focused around patient outcomes, and we can see that that culture is starting to shift in the discussions we're having, and need to ensure that we send the right resource to patients in the appropriate time frame. So with regards to immediate next steps then, we have a strategic partner that should be joining us, and we're just going through some final refinements in mid-September. And the priorities with our strategic partner will be around fully mobilising three key work streams. The integrated care delivery model, which gives us the how. We now know that the challenge we have, so how do we actually respond to these patients? Data analytics, how we best utilise that data working with our system partners, and clearly how we ensure meaningful engagement across the organisation but also externally. So we're working with our strategic partner. We've already started that work internally around a meaningful engagement plan. We've had an interim engagement plan, as you can hopefully tell from the slides, and there'll be a number of components to that. We've also planned in blended workshops with our patients, our people and our partners. That will be at all levels of the organisation, and there's some key dates on the screen here. So in early October, we will be facilitating 4 workshops with each of our integrated care systems. So this is an opportunity for us to understand the external drivers of change, to understand their priorities within their joint forward plans. How do we strategically align? What do we need from them? How do they work with us? It's an open invite, so for any colleagues from within the Council of Governors that want to join those sessions, please reach out to myself. I can share my contact details shortly. Be very welcome to have you with us at those ICS workshops. On the 26th of October, we've then got the Joint Board Council workshop. That will absolutely be a workshop session as far as strategy is concerned. And at that point, we'll be on the forecasting stage. So what we want to be able to bring back to colleagues within this forum is a clear understanding of what we've diagnosed the current state to be, both the internal and external factors, where we started to get to with regard to forecasting, and then that workshop will be centred around and how do we prioritise strategically? What do those 5 strategic options start to look like? And absolutely, colleagues within this forum will be key to those discussions. Then in late November, as it says there, we'll be bringing a more comprehensive strategy update, and I understand from Peter spending a little bit more time on the strategy piece itself. That's the update, David. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Matt. Very clear. Colleagues, obviously this is not a workshop session this morning. What we're hearing today is an update, and hopefully you can be assured, and that really, can we direct our questions around the process? Are you assured the process is in hand? And as non-exec director colleagues, we will certainly be taking those points on board. But also you represent our membership. Our membership is our patients, of course. We've got specific communities that we work with, colleagues, the Blue Light community, for example, as well as our staff. So what I'm also interested in from a non-executive point of view is hearing from our governors those are the questions you want to make sure we're asking on behalf of the people that you represent, as well as your personal input into the workshop sessions, but also want to make sure we get a membership input. But first of all, any questions on process? Peter.
Thanks, David. Sometimes projects like this tend to grow rather bigger than they might be at the beginning. My question to the non-executive directors is, how do you assure yourselves that this project is not going to grow like Topsy? I mean, it's relatively easy to control a budget, I understand that, but it's also about the amount of time that staff are asked to dedicate to it. So what are your processes for looking after this project?
Very good question. Michael, was Chair of Audit, would you like to, and Senior Independent Director, would you like to give an overview, please?
I would watch first and foremost my consultants. My experience of consultants are very much that you can get really good, but they're out to sell you a product. And, you know, I will be watching very carefully that input is very much time limited. You know, I'm sure a lot of governors have got commercial experience. I've seen umpteen times, and particularly the public sector has got a bad reputation in this space. So you need to be very clear about what those consultants are there to deliver. It's time limited with clear milestones. The other factor I'd say is that what will be a deciding factor for me is the strategy will need resource and investment. We're in very choppy times at the moment, and one of the things that I want to watch is how well this strategy is aligned to the NHS's wider business planning cycle. Because if we get out of sync of that, you know, so what I don't really want is a strategy comes to this council or to the board, and we're asked to approve it, and then you suddenly look, well, that's great, we need the investment, but we've missed the business cycle round, and so we've got to tell to staff, the strategy is here, but we haven't got the money to deal with it. We will fall flat on our face if we do that. So there's something about alignment with other business time cycles. And you're quite right. I'm really impressed by what David and Matt, what everybody's doing. I've got no problem about the quality, but I agree with you. What we need to say is, for me, if you can't deliver a strategy in 6 months, you know, and that's quite ambitious, you've failed. So, you know, we've got very tight time scales that we'll be bringing to account. So it's a very good question. And, you know, I'm like you, I'm a bit of a cynic in this space, want it to work. But, you know, the part of assurance is to ask those difficult questions.
Take a question from Martin. I wonder if Subo as Chair of Workforce and maybe Liz as a member of the Clinical Quality Committee. Is there anything what's your personal take on this in terms of as non-executive colleagues around this process and the work that's been embarked upon? Subo, do you want to go, Liz, from a clinical point of view, first of all?
I'll go first, and thanks, and it is a great question. And I think in the title it's called the Clinical Case for Change. So I think from the Care Quality Patient Committee, we want to be assured that we're actually making a difference to our patients and our staff. And the data has been illuminating. I think we all felt we were delivering a lot of social care on our calls, but the data has just confirmed that and what our patient population is actually like, so we can tailor that service. So we will formally measure that through the Quality Committee and report back and escalate on that element of it. But we have to make a difference to our patients.
And I think from People Committee, the piece that we're probably have been keeping our eye on is the workforce plan. And obviously we've been looking at that in terms of having a plan leading up to a future strategy. But what does that look like? Because that's going to influence the skills mix of our people and therefore the models that we're going to use for operating and delivering our service to patients going forward. So that is fully on the radar and that's being discussed. So I have some assurance that that is going to be core and central to it. Some of these other things that have come up under the committee around retention, particularly around now that the NHS has published its workforce plan, that also has to feed into our future strategy as well. And so I have some assurance that those things are also under discussion and will be included in the overarching strategy.
I wonder, Chris, do you have any comments to us, member of the People Committee? You've seen this in other NHS institutions as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think I was just going to echo what Subo has just been saying, because I think one of the things that we are really sort of concerned about, particularly in the People's Committee, is how are we going to support our staff in order to make sure that they can actually be part of the strategy. And I think, and because we are trying to ensure that, this is clinically led, and it is those clinicians, as well as being managers, as well as being supporters. So it is how can we put all those things together in order to make sure that we have got a service that is really meet the needs of our community and our people.
Martin?
Hi.
And then
yes,
Brian.
I mean, David invited some of us on the council to be involved in the selection of the contractors to work with the trust. And I know that certainly the process that was followed was robust. I now understand there's been a slight change since we were involved, but one of the things that I was concerned about, and it's Michael's point, is that there's, if you like, the tension between realism in terms of the amount of time required to develop a strategy and equally important the implementation plan, tied in with when usually NHS trusts have to make submissions to whoever you make submissions to now. It's changed since my day, in terms of fitting in with the next budgeting and planning cycle. Now, where it was when Andrew and I were last involved was the intention was the strategy was sort of sorted by Christmas, and then January and February was doing the detailed work around the implementation plan. Now, again, I don't know how the timelines changed, but when I was involved, you had to put something in by the end of January. So there's this tension between having a robust implementation plan and the timeline by which you have to have it in order to feed the NHS kind of larger beast, if you like. But one thing I certainly would be looking for assurance from the non-execs on is that the implementation plan isn't a poorer quality product because the focus is on the strategy and not on the implementation. Because, and to be quite frank, that's why CCAM is a foundation trust and the London Ambulance Service is not, because of the fact that the implementation plan didn't fit with the strategy and didn't tie in with the budget going back a good number of years. So that is something that certainly I think this council should be seeking rigorous assurance on as we go forward.
Well said.
Thanks, Martin. Good question. So let me just set out a few of the parameters, the operating parameters. So we've already been given, finance directors have already been given some of the planning assumptions for next year. The financial planning assumptions are out in draft. And those will start to guide and shape our conversations around the strategy, because what we've had, and you will know this well, the NHS is past master at 1 year planning cycles, which by the time you've written the plan, signed it off, you're already halfway through the year. So the intention is to do two things. One is to move towards longer term planning timescales, so over 2-3 years, and the other is to make most of those plans get delivered more locally. So we've got the financial planning assumptions. Those will be part of the backdrop to the strategy. And those are really important backdrops to the strategy because they will shape what some of the options are, because clearly a key consideration about what we can afford will be what the NHS financial settlement is, and how our commissioners then interpret that financial settlement, working with us to work out what sort of ambulance service we will have. And they are aligned to that task. So although there will be a planning round this year, they have committed to making our strategy timeline work within that planning round and to make it work over a multi-year basis. So on the key product point that you made, for me, the core product that we've got to get out of this, other than just the vision and direction, is the workforce plan that supports it. And Subo and Chris have already talked about that. Our workforce model at the moment has grown in particular directions, but it is not aligned currently to a strategic direction. So we have a large number, for example, and I've talked about this before, of specialist paramedics. Is that our model going forward? To be debated through the process of the strategy. But that, getting that workforce model right, getting that aligned to the numbers that are available to us through the financial planning settlement, getting agreement on that with our commissioners are going to be the three core tasks. What I am confident in is that our commissioners recognise that challenge. They want to work with us to get a good product out of this. And they are as interested in the things that you have just talked about and making sure that we deliver them collectively. And so nothing is certain, and NHS planning timescales are always to a certain degree floating. But as much as I can be, I think the auguries are pointing in the right direction, that we can have a good strategic planning conversation, we can align that with the money, and that we're all pointed in the direction of getting a really great workforce plan.
Thank you. Brian?
Several people around the table have actually said that what we end up by doing, I spent a collaboration putting something out of this, is certainly providing care for those who need it, we may have been favour of being important. And I think when having that discussion with our commissioning groups, I can hear from what Simon's saying, pushing back into those groups that they actually take on a number of their responsibilities, which they seem unable for whatever reason to do. That really is important. But on the back of that, one of the things, thank you, that I observed in terms of the on the shift was actually there wasn't a lot of feedback to our staff that they get parachuted into what can be an emergency situation. They make some pretty important decisions in terms of how they deal with that and then deliver to a hospital or an A&E. And for them, that's the end of it. And I think in some ways, if we are concerned about the welfare of our staff, bearing in mind we have to be aware of patient confidentiality, but most patients I witnessed being treated were very grateful for the help and support they've got. And I don't think they'd hesitate to share the outcomes of where they done in the first place.
Sorry, you had some problems with the mic,
Yes,
and I was very impressed with the fact that you kept going despite the many sonic interventions into your commentary. You raised two really great points. A key assumption, which is why I keep banging on about how important it is that commissioners are involved, are what assumptions are we making about what they will do in the future? Remember that slide that Matt put up? 20% of what we do is in the social, mental health or frailty space. I was at, as I said in my opening comments, the UEC stock take with the Prime Minister yesterday. I can tell you that is a problem that is right around the country. And just as we are grappling with it, we all have to ask ourselves the question, who is going to do what in each of those spaces in the future? Do we think primary care is going to stay as it is or improve? Do we think social care is going to stay as it is? Do we think mental health services are going to stay as it is? I don't know the answers to those questions, but that's why this process of thinking about the strategy is so important. Because if it is going to stay as it is, that has some really important implications for us as an ambulance service. We're likely to continue to need to grow. If, on the other hand, some of that work is going to be released and reclaimed by other partners. It might take us in a different direction. So you're completely right. The other point you make, which is a really good one, and it's a coming field, and it kind of touches on that data and technology piece. One of the things I know our staff are most interested in is what happens to patients once they've gone to hospital or been conveyed somewhere. The technology is now emerging to start to give people that feedback. And I think it needs to be a key feature of our strategy that we commit to giving people the answer to that question, because it really then demonstrates we are a learning organisation. We've talked about curiosity, and I know our staff are curious to find out what happens to patients. And it also perhaps then helps them develop the confidence that if that patient I took went home 3 or 4 hours later from hospital, maybe I could have the confidence in future to take them somewhere different and try something different. That's why the technology space for us in this strategy is so important. So 2 really great questions. And as you scrutinise us in this work, you should rightly also be asking questions of our partners, because we only do what we do because they do what they do. And you've seen that in a large part. There's one other little nuance in that data that I want to draw out. 3% of our patients, that's a relatively small number, account for a large proportion of our demand. And if we got better at dealing with those repeat callers and really had proper services wrapped around them, imagine how much capacity that would release back into the system for us to do other things. And I still don't think we understand those really complex patients at a level that I would like us to.
I think as well, if I may, Mark, I think I'd like to say is on behalf of the, sort of the service you represent, but also the Blue Light colleagues, I think, speak for all of us, say from the board, we want to ensure that there is clarity about the role we all play. It may vary from different parts of the region, but I think it's really important that we get your input as well in this process. And I just make sure we, in terms of our listening to our colleagues, we really do we are working closely with our Blue Light colleagues here, because there will be some subtle differences. We just need to make sure we're all consistent though in what we're offering the public.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There's lots of work, isn't there, now going across police forces, fire and ambulance services about just that, especially around mental health and the impacts of those occurrences. And I agree with the business about our colleagues needing to understand what happens to people after they've handed them on to further care. And I think, again, that applies equally to responders from fire and police. It helps shape our practice too. Thank you.
Extremely grateful for their response. Nick.
Hello. Sorry about that. 2 things. Yeah, I totally agree. We are the Band-Aid at the moment. We cover mental health as a huge amount of our work, and it's long times. These aren't easy jobs. They go on for hours sometimes. And another is end-of-life care, which me as one of those damn specialist paramedics, we do a lot of end-of-life care. And they are complex jobs, and they're really, really difficult. The feedback aspect, I'm lucky because I have access to feedback. I get a lot more feedback than an average person on the street, and it does impact massively on your confidence and your ability to work. You make better decisions based on, yes, I backed the right horse, and it's like a pat on the back, or no, I didn't do very well and I missed this opportunity. I think historically it's always been hidden behind privacy and information governance. But that's not necessarily true. If a family says they treated me really well, I want you to know the outcome, then why can't we have that ability to feed that back to people? Because especially less experienced crews, which we have predominantly a very, very young, inexperienced workforce, if you give them confidence through feedback, that makes a massive change. And going back to the subject matter, I'm a bit of a radicalist in some ways. I think that we're talking about a new model and a new service delivery. And I think we need to seriously consider whether we need to restructure ourselves as an ambulance service into 2 areas, whether you have critical and you have non-critical, and almost an urgent care run by specialists in that field, and you leave the smaller percentage of critical to specialists in that field. And actually you should be tasked appropriately. And I think then you wouldn't have the crossover. You'd have specialists getting to the people, patients who receive the right care, and I think you could cut down on resources. and you could maximise and utilise your resources. So I think we always look at the same model. Oh, there's people in ambulances, someone goes here, someone goes there. We might have a specialist in a hub that we can talk to, but maybe it's time to actually be really radical and say, this is just system doesn't work. And because the whole balance has changed, then maybe we should look at a two-tiered, not two-tiered as quality, but two-tiered as in where you go and who provides that service within it. I mean, we used to, old days you had PTS, STS, patient transport. These were all got rid of and they were privatised and then they went bust because the contracts were never honoured. But actually those were a really important part of the service, and they used to deal with the less high acuity jobs, but the patients were really well managed. Now it's all become this great big smudge that no one really knows what anyone does, but we just know that the ambulance will pick it up. We've done that for so long. Now we're at a point where we financially, we can't afford to do it, and we can't afford to do it and provide that care. So what we need to do is stand up and say, we're not doing that unless you pay us, and we're not doing that unless you pay us. It sounds brutal because we're all about patient care, but actually if by doing all these things it's to the detriment of the patients that we need to get to, then we're not doing anyone a service at all. So I think this is great. It's really interesting to look at the data, and I mean, a lot of that is common knowledge if you work in the control room, but it's not widespread because you see the number of the frequent flyers, whatever you want to call some of these people, who, and it's incredible, but they're so complex because now they know ways around the system, so they'll call for their sister. So when the ambulance arrives, there's no sister there, they don't exist, and they're like, oh, you've come to see me again, hello. So how do you monitor that? It's really, really complex, but it chews up. The amount of resources that we send on these people is incredible. It really is, and it's really nice to see it actually in numbers in front of us, that people now can look at that and go, wow, is that really happening? How can we deal with this? So basically, yeah, be radical. You know, don't be scared. Move forward.
Brief comment from Simon, then I'll take a question from Harvey, then I'm going to declare we have a break.
Well, thanks, Nick. I couldn't agree with more with everything you said, other than perhaps to invite you to be the Director of Strategy and help us answer some of the challenges. No disrespect to David. No disrespect to David. But just to comment on a couple of things you've said. One of the ways in which we can do better and need to do better with our partners is integrating our data. This again came up nationally yesterday. All of us hold parts of the patient's story, and I completely concur with your point about mental health patients. On some of the ride-outs I've been, patients were known to mental health services, but we didn't know that when we were out with that person, and it consumes vast amounts of time, effort and energy. That's not to say those patients don't have needs, it's just to say we could have done a better, more efficient job had we known about it. And I do think we're moving into an era where people expect us now to share their information to help us provide them with a better service. And we don't need to feel shy in making that argument on behalf of patients, particularly around a better service. And the other point I want to make, I think you're right. We're at risk of being a muddle in the middle unless we start to stratify what we do. And the board have challenged me, and although not all board members are here today, I want you to be reassured that I've had that challenge from board members, that we can't continue to be all things to all people. And we have to be bold enough to say, we can do this, we can do that, but you'll have to start recognising that in the funding settlement. So I just want to reassure you that the board is on that part of the page as well.
Final comment, Harvey?
Yeah, it was only picking up on the question of feedback, which I think is great. But there's two types. One is the feedback that we use to work out what services we're going to use, and the other one is the feedback to our people on a job well done or something like that. And it's important, if we're going to have feedback to our people, that has to be very quick, very timely, because otherwise it loses the impact and it becomes quite difficult to actually remember who on earth they were talking about. The other question, and probably it's for Simon, is we're developing and we're putting a lot of work into this strategy, and that's great. There are several other ambulance units around the country. Are they all doing the same at this moment? And if they are, at what point do they actually share it?
Really good question. Starting with a national position, the Association of Ambulance Services is actually refreshing its vision now. In fact, there is a workshop a week tomorrow where that work for the next 3-year period will be starting to be defined. Beyond ACE, as it's called, NHS England are looking at what is its strategy around urgent and emergency care. And we've already got the 10 high-impact changes that we're all busily pursuing in the short term. At an organisational level, there is no mandate, there's no requirement that we all produce a strategy at the same time. So generally, it's when the strategies run out that they get refreshed. And it just so happens that ours ran out over the last period when we are during COVID. But your underpinning question, which I think is a really important one, which is clearly we should, where we can, be working in collaboration with our other ambulance services because there are commonalities across what we do. There's more that unites us than divides us. Yeah. And so I'll be looking at that opportunity for collaboration as we start to develop our strategy, because resources are precious, and it's right that to get the best value for the public pound, we look at what we can do together as well as what we need to do on our own.
Yeah, because unlike a commercial organisation where we would see them as competitors, largely they're not. They're collaborators, and on the borders they share the pain. Yeah. Good.
But I think just to summarise, I think as CCAM, what the board are clear about is we want the organisations to speak with one voice. Next, impressive articulation of some of our health challenges is one aspect of that. We need to ensure that our workforce are in a much better place than they are currently. We do give lots of feedback to them about the quality of patient care. We get lots of positive feedback. But it's frustrating as a non-executive when you make visits to and talk to our staff, how dissatisfied they can be because of the nature of some of the work they're asked to do. This is either beyond their skill level or is not appropriate to their level of skill. So it is important we speak with one voice. Then we can influence, as Simon said, the national debate with some authority with that. That's the key challenge. And we've got to ensure, though, there's value for money and that we're spending public money wisely. So that's certainly a key focus from where the board are coming from. Can I suggest let that discussion run on? We are behind time, but we can catch up with other items on the agenda because the subject matter was so important. Can I suggest we take a break now till 11:40, and then we'll conclude the rest of the business within the time that we have available. So 10-minute break, please refresh yourselves, and then come back renewed at 11:40. Right, ladies and gentlemen, can we commence, please?
That was actually
Sorry? Yeah, it was excellent. No, it's very good. Let's press on, because I do want to finish on time to give you a chance to not only refresh before the annual members meeting, but also to look at some of the presentations our staff are putting on for the benefit of our wider membership this afternoon. So it's important we give due time to them as well. So moving on to the sort of, again, areas of assurance. As I said at the start of the meeting, in the pack is a range of background papers which are available to the board and others that gives the overview of our performance as an organisation. And we've picked up a lot of key issues in the previous discussions we've had this morning. But those, as indicated on the agenda, there's some signposts there to some of the areas you may wish to question non-executive colleagues on. So I think you've also had a pre-meet as well. So there may be some areas that you want to convey. So who wants to come up with the first point on assurance? Peter.
Thank you, David. So question through you, Chair, to Subo. You look at a lot of indicators, and I picked out the retention plan, where you say it's had a number of initiatives, but it's had little impact on improving retention. You have performance and you have a target, but I wondered to the extent to which you're being given benchmarking data. In other words, what happens in other ambulance trusts? Because it occurs to me that would be useful context to know whether we're an outlier or whether we're, in the same sort of stream as everybody else on sickness, for example. So are you asking for benchmark data? Are you getting it? Is there any problem about the executive and the staff providing you with that sort of data?
Thanks, Peter. Really helpful question. Really important one around benchmarking as well. The short answer is yes, we do get benchmarking data. My concern around that is that it stifles ambition. If we look at other ambulance trusts and we say, for example, attrition in EOC 111 is comparable to other ambulance trusts, that might lead us to be a little complacent about actually the attrition is very high. And what I want to say is, well, what's our ambitious plan to bring that attrition down and to improve our retention? So my view is that benchmarking data is important and it's good to have that, but I would like us to be ambitious about what we set out to achieve. So if we want to improve retention, for example, and you've seen from you. So one stop. I think they're trying to tell me something, stop talking. So that stop talking. I've lost my thread, Peter. Does that answer your question? Essentially, yes, we do look at benchmarking data.
So, we're losing it there. Just to add, I completely support the point about ambition. I think that's right. So the NHS long-term workforce plan is going to raise the game on retention. To really improve on this, and it looks like my mic's failed too. So am I going to be subject to the same level of intervention? No, it's come back on. It's fine. I'm going to keep going from the first person who experienced this. You should challenge us on this, and there is some new benchmarking data data out, and it's not really relating to ambulance services. There have been pilot sites around the country, 20 odd trusts around the country, piloting what is best practice in retention. And the evidence that NHS England now assert is that can materially improve retention. So I would ask us all to look at that retention plan when it comes to the board in October and say, is that the best we can do? And, you know, speaking, I've had a number of productive colleagues with union representatives on retention who are just as interested in us as making sure we improve working conditions for staff and leading to their improved retention. So my other point would be, this is something that not just Council of Governors, not just the Executive, but we should all, unions alongside us as key partners in this, be concerned about in doing the very best we can. Because make no mistake, this is a moving pitch, and everybody is going to be in this game now, and we've got to be the very best. And I look forward to all of us having that discussion together at the board in October about what we can do to be great. And if Suba wants to come back in, hopefully I've covered while you regain your thread, but I just thought I'd...
David, may I just come back slightly on that, which is, I suppose, the very best we can may well be tempered by things that we can't control because it's just how it is, if you see what I mean. So sometimes benchmarking data can mean that you don't beat yourself up. And I accept the point that you don't want to get complacent, but on the other hand, sometimes it's good to know that you're not as bad as you think you might be.
Thank you. I just make the point. I think if Howard Goodburn was here, our Chairman of the Finance Committee, he consistently has pushed for benchmark data to compare our operational efficiency, for example. And there's a lot of evidence that looks at ambulance performance in terms of response times, etc., where I think we need to be a bit more inquiring, and we will be as non-executives, is some of the overhead costs, because we want to be able to demonstrate that we're using public money wisely and the money we're investing, let's say IT or in other parts of the business, is appropriate for the job we have to do for our to service our strategy, but also to make sure we're not wasting money as well. So, you know, that's something that clearly is a key area of non-executive challenge. Currently, we will continue that going forward in the interest of being able to say to our workforce, look, every available pound is going on direct patient care that we can manage, and I think that's an important point in any organisation. So that's something the non-executive focus is clearly on. Right. Any other questions regarding the sort of areas of assurance? Nick.
Sorry. Yeah, it's just regarding the retention strategy. So strategy is great. These are the things we're going to do. But how do you find out why people don't want to be here? So what's your way of collecting that data? I've talked before about the validity and importance of exit interviews and honest exit interviews. I don't mean, 2 minutes in a corridor going, are you leaving? You're going to work in the doctor's surgery. Great, it's been lovely. What you need is time for them to be properly undertaken and have an honesty from the individual who's leaving, so they feel, yeah, this is worthwhile. I'm telling you something that you need to know. And then you base your strategy on that and your plan. Because if you don't have that data, then how are you making a strategy based on what you're just getting, and you're making assumptions as to why people leave? And I think it's always, when you dig into these things, often you've made an assumption why someone's leaving. Maybe the grass is greener, they're going to work 9 to 5. And when you actually talk to them, that's not the reason at all. It's because they didn't like their management team. They thought their place of work was unsuitable. So there's lots of factors involved in it. And I'm just wondering is how that data's collated for you then to go on and make your strategy and implement a retention policy strategy, whatever you want to call it. It's just a question about where that information's coming from.
Super. Do you want to comment on that from a people committee point of view and the assurance you seek regarding exit interviews, etc.?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Nick. Yes, that's a really good point. And it's funny you say that. So we've just recently delved into some of that exit interview data. And what was really interesting is that we found that there were 4 main reasons why staff leave the trust. And that hasn't really changed over the years. The reasons are still the same. So if the reasons are still the same, how have we changed and adapted our strategies to retain them? Have we responded to that to make sure we are addressing those things? So I think now that we've actually, had a deep dive into the data, I think we can really start to look at why is our retention strategy not having the impact that we would like it to have. If we are still going at 18% against a target of 10, it is not enough. And so we are having a much more, I think, open discussion, much more creative discussion about what else can we be doing to deliver on that. And the next People Committee is going to do a bit more of a deep dive into that. And so one of the things, for example, will be around flexible working. Do we really support our staff to work as flexibly as they can? And is that going to help retain more of our staff if we can offer more options around that? So those are some of the things that we're exploring, we would like to seek assurance on.
Mark, is it on this point, your question?
Sorry, I managed to have an IT issue and lose the paper, so I wanted to talk about injuries and RIDDOR.
Okay, can we come back to that in just 1 second? Martin, was your hand was raised? Was this to do with this point of retention and excellence? Well, just in summary of that, just again to give the council some assurance, what we are now doing in triangulating our feedback is, as non-executives, we do speak both in terms of, we do speak directly to staff in order to get behind some of the statistics, so to triangulate the figures. And increasingly, as the numbers have been around here a while, the staff have got more confidence in speaking up appropriately to non-executive colleagues. In fact, we're actively, and Simon particularly has been very encouraging of this in light of recent developments in the NHS. We want to make sure there is a responsible but open communication in the organisation and feedback being taken. And certainly we do work very hard as non-executives to triangulate the feedback, because the with respect to exit interviews, they tell you so much but don't always tell you the truth. People actually leave, in my experience, a famous saying, people leave their boss, not organisations. And that's a grand summary, and it may be unfair on some people, but invariably when you dig into issues, it's to do with the relationship you've got with your immediate boss. And that's what we need to improve in CCAM overall. And that's something which, again, is a non-executive focus with the executive colleagues. And we know that Simon and the team are responding to that appropriately. It's about how we lead our staff, which makes the difference. So that's something that's a key theme. Any other questions on this question before I move to Martin and to Mark, to Martin then Mark? Okay, thank you, Martin. Okay, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I lost the papers. One thing that struck me when we had a look at them was around injuries and RIDDOR injuries, and how the relationship with that, with retention, with staff welfare and all the rest of it. Certainly in the Fire and Rescue Service, we've seen our latest intakes being really good aerobically, but less so in terms of strength and physicality, and having to put quite a lot of effort into training. There was that comment earlier about the grip test and things like that, and I just not necessarily an answer for today, because I realise it's a complex subject, but sort of curious about how that's playing out in the ambulance service and whether that's something we need to be more aware of. Thank you.
So, does anyone want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, happy to. So, Mark, I couldn't agree more. So I did observe a night shift at Polegate recently, and I was the guys gave me the pack to carry, and I nearly fell over when, I thought I was carrying my own body weight, frankly, and, we had to carry it up the stairs, and I could barely manage it, and I was like, I think I'll hand that back. So, it came home to me very forcefully. You have to be physically strong as well as, clinically skilled and, have all the driving skills and all these other skills. It's multifactorial what we ask our people to do. So you're right. In terms of RIDDOR, we did get some assurance around how good our health and safety wraparound is for our staff. What's happening on RIDDOR, I think, the main injury that we get there is back injuries. That won't surprise you. It doesn't surprise me once I felt that pack either. And what we have noticed is there is a change in the time frame when those injuries are being reported. So that has dropped. Now that when we explored that and sought some assurance on that, that was really around workload. People were just really busy, so they did report it, but they missed the time frame within which they would normally report it. So I think there is an appropriate focus on looking after physical injuries and reporting that. But I'm also pleased with the TRIM, which you saw in the Chief Executive's report, that we are continuing also to balance that with a focus on our mental health of our workforce as well. And, that's followed up with things like clinical supervision and talking about traumatic incidents and having mental health first aiders as well across the board. So I feel that we are getting the balance right between those two things.
Thank you. But I think as well as a non-executive team, we're very keen not to reinforce stereotypes. And the reality is some of our staff will be slightly built. We need to do the appropriate risk assessments. We're recruiting their brains as well as their physical attributes. So we want to ensure that we are diverse, equal opportunity, and we're embracing all people that want to go and work in the ambulance service. So you be reassured from a non-executive point, we don't want to keep reinforcing the traditional stereotype. Because, quite frankly, the world has moved on from that. So that's something else we need to be absolutely clear about. Right, any other questions, comments regarding looking for areas of assurance from the papers you have before you? Linda.
Let's see if this works. It's the Quality and Patient Committee report. Just looking for some assurance around the safety of the electronic prescribing system. There was discussions around a new clinical safety officer who was undertaking a review of the system, and as this paper was from June, I just wondered how we were progressing that work.
Liz, would you like to comment, please?
I'll pick that up. Thanks for the question. And it was from June, and there has been progress on that. Rachel, our medical director, is our clinical safety officer. I'm not sure she volunteered for the role, but she's been given the role, so has run a review as well. John's in the room, also around the system, and pleased to say we've had some upgrades to that system now that has made it safer for medical prescribing and non-medical prescribing. We are limited in our number of non-medical prescribers, and we're currently recruiting those in. So they tend to be pharmacists who already have that qualification. We haven't yet got to the point to training our specialist practitioners to do non-medical prescribing as such, but it is work in progress. And a bit like our frequent flyers, our callers, we also get frequent flyers to our 1-1 service around drug-seeking behaviour. How can they access prescriptions, medications? The committee didn't have full assurance on that, so we've asked for an update from that following the changes to the system and following Rachel's review as our clinical safety officer.
Okay, thank you. Other areas? Martin.
Sorry, while we're on quality and patient, there's this issue about the 900 public access DFIBs that are orphaned. So what I understand that means is the British Heart Foundation put them in. We don't know where they are. They have a time expired life. So honest member of the public comes across somebody having a cardiac arrest, tries to use one, and it doesn't work. So this seems to be an absolutely massive patient safety risk that no one seems to own. And I suppose the thing is, if we don't, then who will? Being, if you like, the last resort in all these situations. I mean, I know that it says that the Director of Strategy is sort of thinking out a potential approach. I suppose if I were directing it at Tom, and I guess I don't know who I'd direct it to, Liz or... I mean, this seems like something which is really quite important. And are we assured, actually, two things. Firstly, that there aren't going to be people dying as a consequence of not getting hold of this in a timely manner. And secondly, probably a lot of people see a DFIB and think that's related to the ambulance service. So there's a potential risk reputationally as well. Are we ensured this is being properly got to grips with in a timely manner?
That's why the strategy discussions are so important, because that's a classic example of the point that Nick was making. We're all things to all people at times, but more often than not, we can't be. Liz, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I'll pick up, because we had a long, in-depth discussion around our orphan DFIBs within our geographical area that aren't our responsibility yet. They're not all put in by British Heart Foundation. The British Heart Foundation runs the network of current compliant DFIBs that are available to the general public and to us as well. They went out for a call for everyone to register a current AED device that had been serviced and was capable of working in an emergency. What we had known about, there had been a lack of response from hundreds of those DFIBs. So we're not assured that they've been serviced, they're compliant, or even having their general checks. Emma and from the ops team, and we have generally had a look at it. We do have the current available network, and that's available to our teams and our CFRs. We do know the ones that have orphaned, and we're going back out to those orphaned organisations, whether it's sitting in a community hall or a school hall or in a telephone box in a village, to see if we can get them adopted again and brought up to standard. The difficult conversation and cost for us is if we adopted all the orphans ourselves, that would take a team of people just to be out there. And I think it was also a question, and maybe for our members and our volunteers, you know, are they willing to adopt something in their local location? But these aren't cheap to maintain. So I think there's lots of fundraising initially, and then it's that nice shiny box on your school wall, or as I say, in your local telephone box, but then it's who's going to look after it after that. And that's one of the reasons why British Heart Foundation has gone out to actually say, what does the current network look like? But there is a risk, and we are looking at that risk.
Clearly the Quality Committee is across the detail of this. What can I ask though, and I think we make sure this is noted at the board meeting, we want to do non-executive assurance. I think it does need, I think, escalating through you, Simon, to the integrated care organisers, integrated care boards. This is a risk we can accept partially because it's part of our business, and we do work with the British Heart Foundation and others, but we can't be all things to all people. But I think what we must do is leave this hanging in space. So I think what we need to do is just close the loop on this, say what give assurance of what we are responsible for, but also say we're not responsible for the rest. Somebody else, whose job it is to integrate care, it's your job, not ours. Please, can we do this? So let's make sure we're clear on the action from a non-executive request. Thank you for that.
Sorry, the second one, is that working? On the patient thing was, there's this reference in the paperwork to the CAT 3 and 4 validation program impacting on the ability to use CFRs to go to falls patients. I must admit, I'm not sure what the validation program is, but given the statistics that Matt gave us earlier about the 1 in 10, was it, or something, or 10% of the hours or something was used for falls, and given the point that we've been emphasising the importance of CFRs and trying to develop them, can, I put it as an assurance question, are we assured that this problem is being got to grips with?
So we'll respond because we had, again, an in-depth discussion around the validation, C2, C3 and C4. And it was only when we actually looked at the data that came through Matt's team when we realised that from a falls perspective, only a handful, literally 5, were being referred to CFRs. And we asked for the reason for that because it seemed a terribly low number when we had invested in a falls programme, etc. And it is around the validation and keeping our patients safe in the stack. The team have done a huge amount of work around validation, particularly around C2, C3, to meet the government target of a 30-minute response time. And they've also looked at our QI team keeping our patients in the stack, because we know if a patient goes to C3 or C4, the longer they're waiting, the sicker they become. And I know Rachel's in the room, and if it would be helpful, Rachel can talk a bit about that validation and how that's currently working.
Rachel, please.
you able to support yourself? Are you able to get up off the floor yourself? Okay, fine. Are you able to support yourself up the floor? Have you got a relative that can support you up? Are you injured? And some of those C3s aren't even going to our staff now. We're actually connecting to our urgent care responses, so our patients are getting a much more timely response from a local community resource. There is still work to be done. We're not fully assured that we have got our CFRs as plugged in and as utilised as they could be. But that is all being done and looked at through a QI lens, feeding into both those that should be upgraded into a C1 for a more immediate response, because we've got evidence that some probably should have had a critical care paramedic by their side, not a CFR, and should never have sat in that C3 stack. Equally, we've got evidence where somebody has sat non-injury on the ground, which could be my relative or your relative, for 8 hours, when we've had a CFR response that could have been sent. So we haven't got it right. We are aware of it, and we are looking at our data, whether that's DATEXs, whether it's anecdotal feedback, to try and triangulate everything and ensure that Pathways is speaking nicely to the CAD, and that we're getting that right disposition for that patient. But with more UCRs coming online as well, we are seeing a better community response that we can push jobs to, rather than where we had no pathways that existed before.
But good question. It shows the quality committee are clearly aware of this and are pursuing it, and I think Liz's answer gives that evidence. But I think also what Rachel is also saying as our Chief Medical Officer, we're not right yet, it's not fixed. So we're partially assured, but we will be pursuing that in a structured way going forward, because, and particularly again, with knowing the CFR response can be so positive in this area, we want to ensure we're using that resource to its maximum. Because we're so grateful for the fact they've switched their attention as well into they widen their brief from cardiac events into other areas. I'd say it's such a positive development. So we want to make sure we capitalise on this, make sure we all benefit. Right, can I take one more comment on the areas of assurance, and then move us on to conclude the other business? Well, I'll give you one more go, Martin, and somebody else will go as well. So,
okay. Thank you very much. Sorry,
yeah.
Can I move on to finance? A couple of things. Now, what we've got here is the position at the end of Q1. Well, we're now two-thirds of the way through Q2 almost. And at the end of Q1, it was talking about an underlying ops overspend offset by saving or underspend elsewhere. And that was in the context at that point of, if I read it correctly, the efficiency programme being 4.8 million off track. So there's what's the situation now there? Because that kind of says to you big risk financially. The second thing is an operational one, which it basically says we're having trouble recruiting people to keep the vehicles on the road. So there's two things there.
Michael, can you take the financial issue?
Yeah, Howard's not here, so I probably can't answer your question in the detail that you would expect, but Saba is here and may be able to say something. The next meeting of the Finance and Investment Committee is in, I think, 10 days' time, when this will be clearly on the agenda. I think just one general point I'd make about the efficiency programme. Like all trusts, we are under financial pressure. We are very alert to the risks with the efficiency programme, and the efficiency programme is important to make the books balance. I would say we are not in any different position than we were 12 months ago in terms of efficiency savings. What you tend to find is it starts off well, there are difficulties, and eventually you do generally get there. I would also just say one thing before I hand over to Saba, is that we don't just look at finance. While the Foundation Trust has a statutory responsibility to make sure that we use the money appropriately, we also look at that from the perspective of quality and patient care. So we're not cutting the budget at the expense of patients, and that is really, really key. But Saba, you may be able to say more at this point than I can.
Yeah, in terms of our numbers, so 1.5, so August, we just landed those numbers. So overarching, we are delivering our financial plan, so we have a break-even plan, and we delivered that this month in August year to date. Thank you. So we delivered that year to date. Also, in terms of our efficiencies, we've got a £9 million target across the financial year. Plan is 2.2 to deliver at the end of August. We successfully delivered £1.6 million. So we're slightly behind where I would want us to be, so £600,000 behind plan, but that's retrievable. We still have a 7-month period to be able to retrieve that.
I mean, generally, CCAMS manages finances well. But as the executive, Michael's indicated, we are keen to encourage the executive to particularly pursue recurring efficiencies rather than non-recurring, which tend to be our method of balance. But generally, our financial record, though, is good. And again, without getting into benchmarking, compared to many organisations currently in the NHS, our record is strong. So we just need to make sure we look at that way. I know Simon has got that in hand from a leadership point of view.
Just to say, Martin, David and I attended the National Leaders event last week, and money clearly is a topic that's preoccupying national leadership as well. The challenge was put to us by Amanda in this way. She said, look, you're not just there as a board to balance the books. You are there to make sure you balance the risks that exist between the money, delivery, so hitting our operational standards, and patient safety. And she wants boards, and she enjoined us all to go back to our boards and make sure we're having that type of discussion. So the challenge on the delivery of the efficiencies is absolutely correct. What I would simply say is, how do we expand that conversation to make sure whenever we start talking about the money, we have in the back of our minds the risks that could accrue to quality, could accrue to delivery, and we make our judgments in that frame. And that was I think, a fairly recent, wasn't it, David, a national instruction for us?
It was indeed. But that being said, as a board, my non-executive colleagues have been very firm in pursuing a balanced solution to our finance, that we're not pursuing finance at the expense of staff welfare or patient safety. And that's something, a balance we try and strike, and generally the executive have done that well in CCAM over recent years in terms of managing our finances, and at least that gives confidence to the rest of the system. The board has got a grip and we know what we're doing. Even though we're challenged in other areas, we've been quite assiduous in maintaining our financial performance. So that's something which is keen, but a balanced financial performance, not at the expense of patients or staff. Nick, final comment?
Quick question. Sorry, Martin. Hogging the floor. I do apologise. Just a quick question about efficiency savings. So you're talking about efficiency savings and that we've got a shortfall in what's been achieved so far. So that to me says that I'm hoping that they've been spread out across the organisation and departmentalised into everyone has a certain amount they have to save. Well, from what you're saying is that it sounds like some people have been really good and they're making their efficiencies. Other people are not making their efficiencies. So that either says that they're not capable of doing it, and is it too much you're asking them to achieve, or they're not bothering to try and make those efficiency savings, which then puts more pressure onto the other people within. And they're talking about responsibility and autonomy. And if is there any assurance that these people are being held to account for why they're not achieving these goals? Because if some are and some aren't, then there's two ways of looking at it, isn't it? There's kind of you set them unachievable targets or not. And the other thing is about recurring savings. They're what you want. You know, if you sell off the assets of a company, you end up like a Labour government that's got nothing left at the end of the day because you've sold everything. And, you know, if it's a one-off saving, that's not what we want. What we want is people to streamline and make things more efficient.
Yeah, just keeping an eye on the time. Can I just give you something from a non-executive point of view? What we are keen to see is a balanced approach to the organisation. That's why we're encouraged by Simon's autonomy with responsibility approach. And certainly from the Finance Committee and others, we are keen to ensure, though, that everyone plays their part in this area and there are no exceptions, as it were. But they've got to be recurring efficiencies appropriate to making the business improve rather than just for the sake of making cuts. So we are pursuing that, and we're also anxious to move forward a system whereby we know there's variations, particularly in our operating units, as well as in corporate departments of their approach to various things. We want to see some consistency of approach linked to the trust values. And that's something, again, we're pursuing with vigour because we think there's sometimes there's unacceptable variation. We see as a non-executive, we look to the executive to give us some assurance in that area and pursue areas as appropriate. So your general theme, we accept and we're pursuing. So can we, final comment, Michael?
Just to reinforce and to give you the assurance, I don't think personally that this is an issue of some people not pulling their weight, to put it this. I think there's an inevitable, my experience of efficiency programs, there is always a timing issue. You can never get it exactly right, and Howard is very much focused on that. I would return to a point that Simon made. My observation about CCAM is that you can't keep going on looking for efficiencies that are largely transactional. You've got to have an overarching review of the operating model and what is driving your costing. You get that in the right place in terms of balancing patient care. That's really what the strategy is about, and we get out of that something that is more meaningful for the future.
Can I move us on? Because I do want to conclude the rest of the business, because we've got the annual members meeting to do. So I hope you feel that in terms of areas of assurance, you're seeking some assurance or reassured that the executive, at least the non-executives, are working collaboratively with the executives and challenge appropriately on some key performance areas. In terms of business before you, in terms of the routine business of the council that we need to note this morning, first of all, the nomination committee report. Michael?
It's me. Very quickly. Very sadly, you'll know that David's term of office comes to an end just over a year from now, and so we have started the process to look for a successor, and the nomination committee met and we interviewed 3 potential headhunters, and we've appointed Gattenby Sanderson, or the nomination committee made that recommendation. They are now in place. This will be a major exercise of appropriate consultation going forward, and also consultation with a whole range of other stakeholders, including the region and the ICBs. And you see in the nominations committee report the timetable that we're working towards. Happy to take any questions.
Not that I'm counting too much detail, but it is 9 months to the end of my term of office. So just to make sure people are clear. Right, are you happy with that report from the nominations committee? The process is in hand, as it were. The Governor Development Committee report. Kirsty.
Hi, thank you, everybody. I'm happy, due to time, to take the paper as read and absolutely take any questions. What I would like to do, though, is encourage my fellow governors to attend the GDC. It's our opportunity to drive the agenda for this Council of Governors, and I think it's just really important that we should be attending where possible, understanding that we've all got work pressures outside and other pressures. But I'll take the paper as read, and happy to take any questions.
You're all happy to note the report? Thank you. Governor Activities and Queries report. Lee.
Again, due to time pressures, I'm happy to take the report as read if everyone else is. All I would say is that I think it's, every time these reports come out, it's good to see that the list of activities is extending more and more. And I just thank my colleagues on the council for all their out and about activities. And I'll take any questions.
I only have one. I attended the 22nd of August nominations committee. I was inadvertently missed off the list.
We will get that amended. Thank you.
Brian?
Just really A or B, Chair, but actually Membership Development Committee is missing from the agenda. And just to say, to follow on what has been said, there is a review at the moment actually on how we go about engaging with members, and that's actually on my action. So David, the current chair, has actually written quite an interesting paper. Members are getting out and about, and actually we're endeavouring to cover a large number of smaller events to get through different bits of the area. And apart from today, the next opportunity is to meet the governor is at Brooklands on the 17th, on Sunday the 17th. I think Paw Patrol are there as well.
Duly noted. Thank you indeed. Right. Is there any other items of business that we need to transact today? Thank you. Areas to highlight to non-executives. I mean, if you, certainly one of the themes that's coming across is staff engagement, and through all the items that which we'll be keen to pursue, as well as public engagement, of course, in the strategy, but staff engagement as well, in many of the matters that we've been discussing today. And I know that that's the theme through Simon's wish to revise some of the leadership arrangements in the trust, is to ensure we have a more inclusive workforce, that we, through our leadership arrangements, we're generally, there's sort of two-way communication. That's the kind of theme I was picking up from many of the comments that you're making today in your questioning. And also in terms of the highlights, in terms of what was coming across to me was the enthusiasm regarding the work around the strategy. And I think there's still a lot more work to do regarding engagement, but I was certainly receiving some positive signs there that people were beginning to feel engaged in the process. What we've now got to do as non-executives ensure that your input contributes to the output. We actually the finished article, as it were. We've not only got governor input, but a wider perspective. And I would encourage you, particularly linking back to Brian's point about membership. I suppose the acid test of all of our governance arrangements will be when we are rewriting our strategy, consulting. We've consulted with our wider membership. Clearly, our staff make up a large number of that membership, but also we are the public we serve, and also we're partner with. So any help we can give to enable those conversations to take place, I think is certainly a message that non-executives will be taking. We'll be certainly noting and very happy to play our part, but also supporting the executive to make sure we are listening to people and making sure that's influencing the wider discussions of our direction of travel. So it's really important this is because there's got to be a lot externally. I think there's still going to be a lot of work to do, particularly in relation to the state of the NHS, the current challenges the NHS faces, challenges in other parts of the public sector, as we've heard about police and mental health and so on. We want to make sure, certainly a non-executive message is we need to be realistic as well in what we're putting forward for consideration, recognising where our partners are as well. So I hope that brings out the main theme from the questions. In terms of the meeting effectiveness, any comments at all? You've had your say. Do you feel there's been I thought the strategy discussion, if I may say, I thought was particularly helpful in terms of feedback from colleagues. The papers were produced several in excess of eight or 9 days before the meeting. I know there's still some work to do regarding timing with the pre-meet of governors, but I think the questions nevertheless were reflected well, and the fact we got the papers out in sufficient time for people to hear to note the content and to remind colleagues these papers are what the board sees. So you're seeing what the board sees. These patients are publicly available via the website. So if you want a separate copy, I'm sure the Secretariat will be very pleased to provide them to you electronically. We'll save on the printing bills, but we can provide them to you electronically on request if you can't immediately access them. So I hope that's helpful. But if you want to make any other comments on the meeting, please send a note to the Company Secretary privately, and we'll always take your feedback on board. Right, we meet again formally as a council on the 28th of November in Banstead, and we've got, obviously in the meantime, there will be several committee meetings taking place, and the board will be meeting in public in the beginning of October. So, anything else?
Just going to take the question. Any questions?
Sorry, question of the public. I'm too keen to get us to lunch. I do apologise. There are members of the public present. Sir.
I'm a CFR, part of the Crowborough team. I gave up going to C3s many years ago because I just couldn't stand the wait for a crew. You might be there 3-4 hours. I've got other things I need to be doing over a weekend when I'm on duty, and that was just unsustainable from my point of view. So if you can speed up response to C3s, then you might get more CFRs responding to C3s.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. I think that's duly noted, and I'd certainly ask the executive colleagues to bear that in mind. I think that's part of the work that's ongoing, is to make sure we send an appropriate response and a timely response to get it right. And that's why I think we've got to respect. We will encourage the executive speak more clearly with the CFRs, because you do get the eyes on the situation and give more rich feedback. So I would encourage the executive colleagues to make sure that you are part of the solution here. But thank you.
You know, that getting back at 3 or 4 o'clock that one morning, that was a straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, and I think, I think one thing you can be assured about from a board point of view, we have been listening to the CFR community over the last few years in particular. We had a meeting with a number recently, which Michael and I attended. So we do value your feedback, and I'm grateful for your input into the care of our patients. I think there's some coordination. I think we can improve coordination.
And maybe just a flippant comment. I think selling off the family silver is more of a Conservative government.
Fair comment. Fair comment. Yeah, yeah.
We're not allowed to comment. For the neutrality of the chair. Yeah.
You just balance the argument.
Any other,
there,
from the assembled multitude that's with us, are there any other questions at all? Because the staff, in this case, the staff are the public as well, because you're part of our membership. Any other questions or comments from colleagues present? Okay, thank you. Well, we actually finish 1 minute ahead of time, 1 minute late. So thank you for your brevity. We'll enjoy lunch, and then we've got the annual members meeting. But more importantly, please spend time to interact with our staff colleagues who've got a range of presentations outside. So please show interest.
And just say that there is some lunch served in the main building.
Lunch is served in the main building, and the members meeting starts at 2:30. 2:30.
2:30, yeah.
2:30. Okay.